Hi, friends. This is Yoga Light, and today, as part of a series on the experience of remembering past lives, we briefly look at reincarnation. For reincarnation, the essential idea is that over eons you have been incarnating over and over again through many lives. In the yogic sense, you are one with the universe. You come from a transcendent beyond existence. At the same time, you are one with all. You are also an individual uniqueness. So we are transcendent, universal, and individual all at the same time. The soul is not the temporary personality we normally think of as ourselves. Our surface personality is ever changing. On the surface, who we are is related to our circumstances, age, who we are with, and what we do. We can switch identities very quickly. For instance, we can become identified with impatience, frustration, and anger when caught in a traffic jam. Then, because of the action of somebody we see while stuck, for instance, a couple walking a dog, we suddenly become quite different, developing warm feelings. This shift causes us to identify with patience in the traffic jam. We might then well say it is not just the emotions, our personality has to do with some core beliefs. These also change over time, and it is easy to view history and see changing beliefs. And these beliefs are largely learned from our circumstances and experiences. We might say it is our quality of character, but this too may change due to experiences such as trauma, illness, or change of circumstances. Someone with a strong moral compass may suddenly shift if their financial situation is stressed, and they may do things to try to save their status or their family. When asked who we are, we may respond differently depending on whether we are in work or a social situation. So reincarnating is not replicating who you are today, just having another bodily form. Beneath the surface are layers of our being connected to the subtle worlds around us. Most of this is not in our awareness, but we glimpse these worlds and experiences during subliminal dreams, out-of-body experiences, or connection in the outer world where things are arranged by a hidden hand. Things normally called psychic activity can present us with these contacts with subtle realities, such as seeing the dead, knowledge of the future, and hearing guides. Subtle worlds also come into play when people manifest something or see the effects of something they put in motion returning to them. The idea that you can manifest some things or send energy out into the subtle world that influences the physical world. Some understandings of karma fit this. Mantra, ritual, and visualizations are all methods that are sometimes used to change our circumstances. Action in the subtle world organizes the result in our physical one. In our relationships, we may even keep finding similar people to relive our patterns. These people come due to connections in the subtle world, our wider consciousness, the subliminal. It has access to more resources, deeper knowledge, and connections not bound by time and space. We can learn from these worlds about subtle things or about our physical world. In terms of dying, we can refer to these as worlds of the mind. We can divide these into three kinds. The first are worlds that exist only for us, our personal subconscious worlds. Beyond this are shared worlds where people have similar levels of development or are focused on the same things. The same beliefs interact and intermix. It may be difficult to enter into contact with worlds where people are on different vibrations or levels of development. My friend used to travel the world and buy crafts in remote villages such as Tibet or Malaysia. He practiced a specific type of meditation and knew many other practitioners in the U.S. Still, while traveling abroad, he would find himself going into a small village market and seeing somebody new from this tradition. Or he would be walking down a remote alleyway and another person he knew would be approaching. It is rather a small world. When the student is ready, the teacher appears because you communicate in these subtle worlds. These are worlds of drama that we occupy because we have formed a connection and identify with them. Many of them are linked to our relationships. Beyond the shared worlds are the universal worlds. These are usually glimpsed by spiritual experiences when we go past our individual identity and come into the experience of universal nature and cosmic consciousness, where one sees and experiences the self in all or sees it as a whole from an individual point of view. One can become conscious of universal forces and movements in the world, just as one may be tuned into the local worlds of drama. There is also the experience of the transcendent, which is eternal, peaceful, blissful, and apart from the ever-changing world of manifestation. yet contains it and puts it forth out of an infinite energy and possibility into space-time. Beyond our conceptions, it can only be touched by words. At the time of death, the soul picks a direction for the next life. When one dies, the body falls away, taking any physical pain with it. Then we start to withdraw from these drama worlds as parts of our subtle body decay or fall away over time. Strong emotional projections, such as anger and hatred or powerful desires, can be ejected and continue to act for a time until they find something receptive. Sometimes when someone dies, things around them change dramatically because they no longer hold things together. Our subtle force of being or will presence withdraws. With the more developed connections to worlds, you may continue to live in subtle form. For instance, you may be able to communicate or influence with close family members or friends. It depends on your investment or attachment and how organized you are inwardly. Also, how receptive they are. But as parts of you decay and fall away, your sense of self changes, making it hard to keep in contact. For instance, you and your spouse come into some money and decide to build your dream house. You spend months making arrangements, finding land, an architect, and being able to plan the house and the furnishings. Then mid-process, you die. For a time, your energies remain connected to the house as it comes into completion. This interaction can influence the construction. Some may be sensitive to your presence, but as time rolls by, you change, and your interest begins to fade as the world becomes less and less like the physical world. How much of your sense of purpose and identity and how much it helped you to grow, what it represented to you, are all factors. For instance, with your body gone, you no longer have to travel places physically. Your mind can go there instantly, just as your mind does now in memory and imagination. You will go to places where your mind has habits of frequenting. But things will appear differently. Besides the knowledge that you are dead, things will be experienced as appearing and arranged differently. Dreamlike, at first only slightly, but then bigger changes, and they will continue to change. Many layers beyond the physical respond much more quickly to the influence of your mind. You visualize something and it takes form. You can seek knowledge of something and be shown. Your familiar world will be less accessible, and the play of forces and conditions that kept the habit alive will dissipate. Some people use lucid dreams to overcome trauma. When they become lucid, they confront the trauma in the dream, and it is not the reaction to the fear or dysfunction that helps. It's that they know they're dreaming. In waking life, we can conceptualize that a traumatic memory is just that, a memory, that it is not actually happening right now, that it is in the past, but this doesn't get rid of the trauma. However, experiencing the trauma in a lucid dream is mixed with the unreality to such a degree that it changes the basis of it. Knowing it's a dream while within the dream gives us more ability to disinvest our attachments to our sense of reality and the habits of identifying with the senses. Bliss states or profound states of peace can also transform our perception and values. In yoga, this is why samadhi states remove the basis of the afflictions, the kleshas. You experience a sense of self apart from the habits and normal perception. The world we perceive is an interpretation of the senses, but as we become more aware, we can move beyond the senses to the deeper parts of our being. When we die, except in extremely rare situations, we know we are dead. This changes our sense of what is real, what is important, what is happening. It is still flowing in a stream of conditioned consciousness, but the conditions are changing. When you work with a team and someone departs, there can be a different dynamic. When you have to give up a certain activity, something you enjoy, that motivates you, it changes the other parts of your life. Not having a body and soon losing contact with your familiar world changes you. When we take up an activity, such as teaching school, we create many habits, getting up in the morning, making something to take for lunch. We also develop emotional habits of keeping up our professionalism. We may act a certain way despite how we feel because of the teacher's persona. We have a role in a system. This role is shown to the external world, but it involves our internal system at the same time. Over time, our ability to assess a situation and react to it is trained. We can perceive and understand the psychology of students. This organization of different aspects of ourselves may not apply to different settings, such as our home life. We can keep it together at work, but then on vacation act in very different ways. Well-organized and developed parts of ourselves may continue much longer and can even exist dependently. These lines of force can be picked up and influence others. For instance, a particular development in a physical skill, such as knapping stone tools or playing guitar. For instance, instead of a spiritual teacher reincarnating, they may transfer the knowledge to another person. These organized ways of being are not the self. They are vehicles we use in life. When a medium contacts the dead, the familiar part comes through. We appear in costume. Last are the mental worlds, which also fall away, bodies of knowledge, considered thoughts. The soul then goes on to assimilate the life and prepare for the next incarnation. What is carried to the next life is largely those things related to the spiritual growth of the being. If we are organized around the soul, this can come through into the next life. These are parts of the missions that the soul came to fulfill. The karma brought into the next life, the momentum is largely based on what needs to continue or be confronted. If you graduate from the 4th grade and your parents move across the country in the summer, you will not go to college. You will start the new school by entering the 5th grade or perhaps repeating one grade or skipping one. The spiritual missions are built on what has come before. You bring this momentum, both things that support you and things you must learn to master, as karma. If you die of an overdose of drugs, you may carry this momentum into the next life to again be confronted with the same challenges to be overcome and mastered. We can divide these into 2 types of karma, things that have been achieved in your development and things that support positive and negative growth. For instance, in a past life, we show personal courage and self-sacrifice and carry this quality forward. Or instead, we succumb to chasing desires and find ourselves controlled by them. We then have to face desires until they are mastered. As we incarnate, 3 things determine the birth: the world conditions, the karma, and the soul mission. We can draw upon karmic momentum in situations supporting our mission, such as mastering the physical body. In one lifetime, we may have developed our athletic potential, and then in a later lifetime, we draw upon that as a means to have other experiences, such as the fame from being an athlete. This has to do with whether we have taken birth to evolve our relationship to our physical body, or whether we are evolving in relationships to our ego. So our karma is different for the different parts of the being, the physical, the lower and the higher emotions, and the mental abilities. In another life, we may not choose to bring that physical perfection, but instead take up a quite different kind of life, perhaps one where we have a debilitating congenital defect, as this will give us the best opportunities for the soul's progress. The soul, as it progresses, can direct and organize from our past lives what to bring as potential abilities and life experiences. This is part of the action of the Kundalini at the time of conception. Karma is blended in with the world conditions and the spiritual mission. We don't complete kindergarten and go to college. We go to the 1st grade. Karma and our development are linked. We have a certain momentum, but don't go from one moral punishment or reward to another. Karma is not about keeping a moral scorecard. As we progress in the chain of being, we have more ability to create conditions for the soul's growth, more power to select from our library of karma, and more awareness of where and when to incarnate. World conditions such as natural disasters may overcome our ability to create the necessary conditions for growth. A person caught in a calamity or war may not have had sufficient power of organization to make use of the world's conditions. They may die before their mission is completed, and then they have to undertake a new birth to try again. In the same calamity, you may find another being who did incarnate for that experience, or find souls whose inner connection to the world is strong enough that they were able to avoid the situation entirely as the event became visible to their foreknowledge in this life. In yoga, you have to reconcile the seeming contradiction of the divine's determinism in an absolute sense and the relative play of forces in the world play. If too much weight is placed on karma as a strict mechanical force, we find that you would most likely only incarnate in the same family and village time and time again as the same sex. When the soul mission, a progressive value-added evolution through lifetimes, is considered, we can more easily reconcile the experience and knowledge of a past life. We will examine in a future video the 10 forms of consciousness that we evolve through. If you are a woman, your experiences and your growth potential are very different if you incarnate in a modern state versus Afghanistan. The past life memory is formed when the soul reaches from the depths of our being to the surface, when the true part of ourself directs the being. The benefit of teachers is that they can, by their own example, help you to emulate their connection. Their energy and presence cause your soul to come to the surface. Their energy or vibration raises your own so that the influence is effective. Though teachings and practices are important, your connection to the divine is essential. Teachings may help establish a shared subtle world by repeating prayers, mantras, rituals, and music. The soul carries the impressions from these moments. These are what are remembered. Sometimes the situation is very symbolic as life reaches a certain determining point. At other times, there are simply sense impressions. For instance, in experiencing a moment of peace and connection, you were looking down a road toward a tree. The tree is the past life memory that returns, or the soul may be involved in a certain line of development, for instance in music, something that helped you progress, and that theme comes through with a past life memory. The themes have to do with their relation to your growth. If you benefited from a certain religion or teaching, you are more likely to incarnate in that tradition. If you have a teacher, you are more likely to incarnate with them again. As a teenager, I once drove too fast down a country road and hit loose gravel where I lost control. As the car was spinning and I was fighting to control it, dust was everywhere and I couldn't see the road. At that moment, in slow motion, I knew clearly and heard a voice softly say, "You will be okay." The car came to a stop, and I drove on my way. That moment of knowing stayed with me. So at various times of peak stress, other parts of our being can arise. This can happen at the time of death, a peak stress point. But the connection to self can also arise with clarity and serenity, and death can fade into peacefulness. This is one of the reasons your mind at the time of death impacts your incarnation. But the moment of death, for most, is no accident, regardless of the cause. Natural forces can be the deciding cause, overpowering your karma and your soul, but for most, it is the soul behind the scenes, and things are arranged. Your life choices, your momentum, bring you to that point. How well it is under your control depends on where you are in your development. The surface description of events is a poor guide to understanding what is happening. The truth can only be seen by an intuitive vision. All 3 parts affect the direction at the time of death: your karma, your growth, or the world conditions. The aim of yoga is eventually to be free of karma and conditions, and only be an expression of the divine. You can interact with people who have little connection to their souls. They appear more as a set of conditions, a play of consequences of those conditions. The moments where they make progress may be few and far between. This is why practice and being active in seeking something higher must be fed like a precious inner flame. When you die, the soul travels, and the parts of your subtle body that the soul shapes comes with us. This includes things we were working on, so karma can follow us. We can be drawn back towards spiritual relationships with others, such as teachers or traditions. At the moment of death, there can be a transfer of the dramatic parts of the being. For instance, if one is dying of an illness, and instead of being able to seek a peaceful transition, one is surrounded by grieving or relatives fighting, those energies can follow into the next life, sometimes causing illness of the baby and mother as her prana is affected. A transfer can also cause children to remember their previous lives vividly. It is a consequence of the life review as the soul arises and the new direction is set for the next incarnation. This can follow and enter into the next birth. To summarize, the soul comes to the surface and the impressions are retained. These are what come as we glimpse past lives. Parts of the being that are well developed and help the soul's development can return, being brought back at later times if needed, or abandoned for a time as other possibilities are entertained in different areas. For instance, if you developed yourself through self-discipline during the life of a blacksmith, That line of development may need to be put on hold as you learn to deal with being born into a rich family and live a life of aimless leisure. The world, universal nature, still has an influence. You also need to be cautious about gender, group, or paired soul ideas. Some traditions would hold that you are always the same sex, or that you are always incarnating with the same group of people, or that you have a soulmate, or even a counter soul. Souls have an individual aspect, and there is no reason to assume that they all developed at the same pace or path. The fate of the soul, in terms of a peaceful dissolve into the eternal, one that merges in the supreme as an active possessor of the universe, or one that consistently chooses birth to help further others along, all are possible. For many times and places, people were organized around specific societal roles based on gender. Pathways of growth may have followed those lines for many births. The idea that you keep incarnating with the same people would have made sense in a small village with little change over generations, but many people now grow up, move frequently, and have mobility undreamt of before the Industrial Revolution. I have no contact with the people I went to school with before high school, nor anyone from my hometown. Many people come and go in your life. Important people may be only a brief presence. There is also the idea that certain people make contracts to incarnate to help you. This is certainly possible, but many fish are also in the sea. If you look at relationships, you can find people who always attract a certain type. There may be many people who can play a part or a role, and rather than having a lawyer hammer out a contract in the in-between birth state, instead, the general nature and your own inner being attract and manifest conditions for spiritual growth, or you fail and are swept along in the general flow of the universal nature. If you need someone to feel compassion, or if you need someone to resist you, many people can fill this role. If you don't learn your lesson, another person can come along. It is a flexible script of possibilities. The ideal and mission, the truth, the original work, has to be adapted to the world. Your growth can influence those around you, but it is not inevitably so. The soulmate idea also seems like a construct because of the fluidity and timing of relationships in many parts of the world, or even the idea of marriage in some cultures. In soul development, things to be learned with certain people create a connection that can be revisited, but this is more likely to be applied to accomplished teachers and less so than to the helpful people in our lives. Again, there are many fish in the sea. The world conditions produce a variety of ways to be a mother, with social and cultural trimmings, medical intervention, and all the norms. Having a mother is a special relationship that over 7 billion people worldwide have. However, it can also be the case that a certain group of souls may incarnate more or less as a team. All of these are possibilities, and we must either gain a deeper insight or a special need to know for these things to be clear in a specific case. In any of these examinations of past lives, one will find a variety of possibilities and experiences. One can point to a speculative mind running wild. Still, there is an intuitive imagination that occurs, a discriminating faculty. Vivek can sort things out and even sense its own limitations. The wisdom is to use this ability. In Part 3, we will look at the problems of past life memory experiences. In Part 4, we will look at their relationship to the aims of yoga. If you get something out of this video, please hit the like and subscribe. Till next time.